All right, this is going to be a conversation with Colton Hemingway. Colton is an amazing individual working in social services, found a passion driving and working in social services, currently in grad school to make that dream happen. And working in conversations with Colton about his work and the work that he does and his engagement, thought it'd be a great opportunity to engage in a conversation about labeling, impacts of labels, stigma, and Colton's experience, with understanding the power and the influence of stigma, and how to maybe move in a different direction. So, welcome, Colton.
Hey.
Appreciate you sharing your perspective. So, with that, how have you experienced or seen, labeling and stigma in your work with the homeless and work with other populations as well?
Yeah, so I think oftentimes we look at issues of like homelessness or addiction, and we think that we're going to come up with some one size fits all solution to solve that. And, I think a lot of people have preconceived notions about how people experience homelessness, that homeless people are usually lazy, or they don't want to work, or they've made bad choices in their life. But if you actually dig in and get to know people, you realize that they parallel our lives of the majority culture more than we think. That a lot of people have a slip or something that happens in their life. Maybe they lost a spouse, and they're experiencing homelessness. I think that the biggest stigma is that people are just lazy, and I don't think that that's helpful to the problem at all. It doesn't really address the other issues that people are facing. So the biggest one for me that I saw was mental health being just a huge obstacle. People to the point of schizophrenia where they don't even know where they are or what planet they're on, and they're homeless. I mean, they're sleeping in a ditch at night. And so that's kind of what got me interested in wanting to go further with, a master's degree, is being able to understand what the struggles are and then what's getting in the way of this person being successful. I know that when I was a case manager, it was at the Bethlehem Inn in Bend, Oregon. And so often it would just be these problems that are so much larger than something I can fix with one person, so much larger than just, well, we need to get you a job, or we need to get you on disability, or we need to get you into housing some way or another.
Yeah,
It's
that's
so
sort
much
of
larger.
this perception sometimes that if somebody would just take this one step, or if they would do this one thing, that they would be fully independent, would not need any sort of social support or service. A lot of misunderstanding. And I think, there's two different things in operation that we could talk about. I'm going to kind of maybe focus our attention on the second one. I think the two things to talk about are like where those labels come from the general community. So why do we develop, one perspective is like, why do we develop that perspective that individuals who are homeless are not working hard enough, or they're lazy, or they don't care? That's not about, that doesn't come from lived experience and conversations with the homeless. That comes from culture and a lot of other things where that come from. The second part, which I think what I'd like you to focus on a little bit, would be, and you can touch that first part if you want, just sort of that sort of general cultural kind of piece and the weight of that, of how that gets communicated to people who are homeless. But specifically the second part, in your experience, do individuals that you've worked with, do they ever talk about the label? Do they ever feel that? Like, how do you sense that they've been stigmatized, or that they're viewed as less than, or that they're viewed as sort of this person with that they've been dehumanized? Like, did they ever talk about that?
Certainly. I know a lot of people, they don't want to admit that they're in the situation that they're in. So many times I would hear people say, look, I'm not like the rest of these people. And, that's happening within, that we're all in this same setting. And I think it's powerful for people to think that anyone that goes there kind of has that mentality of like, I'm not like the rest of these people. Like, nobody sees themselves as this homeless person. But then the stigma that they've been fed continuously throughout their life is that homeless shelters are shameful. And it's the same way that we start to think, that we see somebody, asking for cash on the street, and we look down on them for that. And so the stigma starts to become that it's a negative thing. So if you associate yourself with being homeless or living at a homeless shelter, that's very negative, because that shows people that you don't want to work hard, that you're lazy, or that you're no good. And a lot of the time, like I said, it's mental health. Or we had people that are older that before they went to hospice, they stayed at our shelter. And the last place that they called when they passed on and hospice called, they called the homeless shelter. And it's devastating to see that people are so far pushed into this box of homelessness that it's like not even their families communicating with them anymore. So I know I was kind of just talking about some of the things that lead to homelessness, but as far as your first point, I really do think that the labels are developed on just not understanding it fully. You know, we look at something and we think that we get it from the amount of information that we have, and it's just ignorance.
Mm,
And I don't mean that in like a negative way of, you know, people are so ignorant, but it's like we need to be more informed as to what people's experiences look like, so that way we don't have this big labeling theory around everything that somebody's
right.
doing. And I think it hurts people because, like I said, they express that when they come to the shelter. So they immediately, their first thought walking in there is shame.
Yeah, yeah. And that's just, compounds factors that are already there in terms of mental health factors that are already there. And to be marginalized, already a group that's been marginalized and going through a lot of life struggle at that particular moment in their life, to have that on top of that is just not, it's counterproductive and not healthy. Interesting of making the distinction, right? That I'm not like everyone else here. And that's,
So
I
many
think, fairly
times.
common is people, when confronted with something that's stigmatizing, we try to protect ourselves from, we don't, try to protect ourselves. It's a self-preservation kind of strategy to engage in, for sure.
And one thing that's interesting is that for a lot of people, they would almost rather experience homelessness and heartache and struggle rather than be labeled. You know, we talk about different privacy things where we say, hey, we use this system for tracking with the state. And they're like, I don't want anyone knowing I'm here. I want it low key. I don't want this to come back and bite me. But it's just like someone's coming for help, and their worst fear is still the stigma, not the homelessness that they're experiencing or the abuse that they've been experiencing, or, you know, God forbid, like a death in the family. Their main concern is like, I don't want to be seen as one of these people.
Yeah, yeah. What about, so this kind of thinking about at the shelter itself, individuals who are there receiving services at the shelter, in your experience, that group, they understand it. I mean, compassionate for each other.
To an extent, I mean, there's always going to be variation among any population. Um, that I think it is a place that people grow their empathy greater, though, that they start to realize like, wow, I had a really tough time and now I'm here. And then they, you know, look over at the next bed over and they're like, holy cow, that's horrible that this person's going through this. And so it's kind of like this breeding ground for empathy, that people
Yeah.
can see like these struggles and they can start to understand, you know, what people are experiencing. You know, they come in saying, I don't want to be one of these people, and they leave feeling like, man, I wish we could help more people that come through here.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful. And then to realize you're not alone, right? So you
Totally.
realize that my experience is very unique to me. And at the same time, there's larger issues that are going on that are shaping me. Hey, if you could share a story, I think one of the key things that we can do, that individuals can do, is to humanize each other. And that can happen in so many different ways. You mentioned empathy, just trying to understand, and that's going to require sometimes challenging our cultural beliefs and ideas, the things that we have been socialized into and have accepted, to push back against that and to humanize. And you had I thought, a really powerful story of a recent experience when you were up in Portland walking around, and you were, at Powell's bookstore, and there was a homeless person who was wanting to sit down with people and have an ice cream. Can you walk through that a little?
Yeah. So it's a kind of interesting story. So I'm just kind of cruising down the street. This is after I've moved here to Portland. And so I'm cruising down the street, and this guy's standing out there, and he's pretty grimy looking. It looks like he's been having a pretty rough time. And he's just standing out there offering people ice cream. And they're just walking by and no one wants a part of it. And so I'm like, you know what? I'll stop and talk to the guy. And so I stop to talk with him. He tells me kind of his story. He tells me he's really struggling with, getting food, and he's having a hard time accessing his food stamps. He's having some really severe mental health concerns. And he really just wanted to know where he could access these things. All he wanted was a conversation with a human being that would just be like, yeah, I hear you, man. Let's work towards solving this problem. Not once did he ask me for $1 or $2 or food or anything. He gave me an ice cream. I sat with him, ate my ice cream, and then that's all he wanted from me. I think so often we see people on the side of the road, you know, and if they are asking for money, that's what they're asking for. But we assume that they're not worthy of it because they're asking for it, which is kind of ironic. But there's a lot more to people that are homeless and on the street than asking for money. I mean, just having a conversation with somebody like I did, like I helped him figure out how to go get his food stamps going. Like, that's great. Granted, the ice cream might not have been the best choice for spending money, but like he was wanting someone to talk to him to the point where he bought like this caramel coated wonderful ice cream. He had this whole box and they were melting, and he's like, do you want them? No one else will take them. I was like, no, that's okay. Thank you for my ice cream. I think that, you know, there's a lot of little things that we can do to help people, you know, that's besides money. While I was working at the Bethlehem Inn, I found out that the amount of donations that we receive, non-cash donations, would equate to the amount for 3/4 of our shelter to be housed, just based on the non-monetary donations that were given. So like shoes, blankets, pillows, mattresses, like just stuff. Literally, like we could pay for 3/4 of the people to have consistent long-term housing, but we kind of like nickel and dime it down. And so I think that if you're thinking about different things, you know, to give to people, if you see somebody on the side of the street or on the road or wherever, and they're looking like they need help, you can always just ask them. And if you don't feel comfortable giving them money, don't give them money. Just have a conversation with them.
Yeah, it's like, it's just, you know, that it doesn't have to be an exchange, you know, an exchange, even if somebody may be asking for money, just to hear their story, or
Yeah.
to, you know, hey, how are you doing today? You know, like just that sense of the way to be a steward of the community at large. I think it's just super powerful and fascinating to get into thinking about sort of where our ideas about particular populations or individuals come from, in this case, talking about the homeless. So I appreciate you sharing your perspective. I think, you know, you provide a lot of great, fabulous examples and illustrations, and sort of leaves me with thinking about at another level, another way, the power of labels to impact how not only other people see an individual, but how individuals have to struggle or respond to that kind of labeling from society itself. So it's a partnership. You know, it's a partnership. We all play a role in some sort of way in this conversation about, in this case, homelessness. So thank you, Colton, for sharing your perspective. Best wishes to you.
Thanks for having me.